Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This is covering the campaigns where we go from here. And that begs the question, where is here? Where are we? There are a lot of ways to answer that, of course. But I think one of the things that is inescapable is that in the American political landscape these days is dominated by Donald Trump. Not just nationally, but in local communities as well. This is the first in a series of discussions. And to be clear, the focus here is, given the realities, how does journalism respond to those? Let me share quickly how this idea began, and then I will do my best to get out of the way and let our experts tell us what they think about these things. In May, CNN televised a town hall meeting with Donald Trump and one moderator. Okay, so as I was saying, in May of this year, CNN televised a town hall with Donald Trump and one moderator. And in part, this was an effort by CNN under its new chairman to appear more neutral, not only by giving Trump the platform, but also by populating the live audience with his supporters. By most accounts, this event was a disaster, and not coincidentally, the CNN chairman lost his job shortly after that. In the aftermath, a lot of journalists and pundits expressed the idea that how campaign coverage moved forward needed to be critiqued, debated, and discussed. So here we are, being part of that conversation. And we have some great experts to make that happen. To my immediate left is Elisa Adams. She is, among many other things, managing editor and assistant teaching professor here at Cronkite, and director of the election coverage for Cronkite News. She has decades of experience in broadcast news, including once working for Walter Cronkite himself, not to mention for 60 Minutes, also at CBS. She has also been executive producer at Arizona PBS and started and managed the debates there through the 2020 elections, including the McCain Senate debates and dozens of congressional and statewide debates. To her left is Nicole Carroll, executive director here of ASU Local Journalism Initiative, easy for me to say, at the Cronkite School. She's the former editor of the Arizona Republic, where she spent 20 years and led a project on the proposed US border wall that won a Pulitzer Prize. She became editor-in-chief of USA Today in 2018. That same year, she won the Benjamin C. Bradley Editor of the Year award by the National Press Foundation. And maybe most importantly, she's a Cronkite alum. And then on my far left, Jen Fifield is a reporter for votebeat.org. Information in the election process. Before that, she covered Maricopa County and Phoenix for the Arizona Republic, including a high-profile review of the county's 2020 election. She's won several regional press awards, both in Arizona and Maryland, for her reporting. She's a Phoenix native and, again, importantly, a Cronkite alum. So welcome and thank you all for being here. Lots of places, of course, that we could start, but let me circle back to that CNN town hall. One critic said that giving the former president the opportunity to repeatedly lie to a television audience isn't getting us out of our silos. Another critic said that CNN actually did America a favor by showing that Trump is still the primary threat to American democracy. So let me bundle a few questions. Was the town hall as bad as most observers say? What can we learn from it? And as the subtitle of our event asks, where do we go from here?
I'll jump in. Yes, the town hall was that bad. I wonder if I might take how many of you watched the town hall? How many of you saw it? Oh, that's good. That's more hands than I actually thought. Because honestly, I don't think it was as widely viewed by people of this generation as it might have been by people from a different generation. And therefore, I'm not sure it had as much impact as we thought. But in one area, I think it definitely it hit home. And this is something as academics we really struggle with. We teach all of you one of the truest things about journalism is fairness, right? Give both sides. You have to give equal opportunity to both sides. Another pillar, though, is truthfulness, and weighing those two. Do we always have to? Do we have to be fair? And does that sometimes outweigh truth? And I think that's one of the toughest things that we're struggling with when we cover politics these days. Because quite honestly, if President Trump is being untruthful, as he was, is it our obligation to give him the same, do we have to be fair? And I think that's one of the things that came out of that debate. I mean, we were struggling with it way before that debate, but after that debate, I think, or that town hall, excuse me, I think it really came to the fore. How much time do we give somebody if they're not being truthful? And do we have to give the same amount to counter to be fair?
Agree, it was that bad. It was that bad. They set it up to be a spectacle and it delivered. The shiny floor, the big flags in the back, the giant auditorium with 2 people on stage. It's like putting a bull in a ring that's going to charge, right? And that's exactly what happened. So my issue with it isn't that they had Donald Trump, it's how they had Donald Trump, and that they did do it live. And you cannot refute and fact check fast enough on a live broadcast. So I just left USA Today in May. I was there for 5 years, and before that, it was public. So I had a front row seat to how to handle Donald Trump over the last 5 years. And we got to a point pretty quickly. We decided we weren't going to carry him live anymore. We weren't going to live stream the rallies or the speeches unless it was something of like national importance or national security. And we did that because we couldn't fact check fast enough. So what we would do is we would record it, and then we would go back and we would take the snippets and do video on demand of the things that we thought were newsworthy, and we were able to fact check and present it in a truthful way while we did that. The other thing we did is, during the coronavirus, we had those daily briefings. And, Trump was saying a lot of untrue things then as well. But we knew the material was really important, right? This is life and death. People needed that. So what we did is we assembled a fact-checking team, probably dozens of people. We had spreadsheets of facts because you know what he's going to say. He said it before. So we had all the facts on a spreadsheet. We had all the social media pre-written, and then we live streamed it on all of our channels through Twitter, but we could actually put on screen in real time the fact or the truth. And if it was truthful, we said it was as well. We were really prepared. So we had producers sitting there with a spreadsheet. And so when he would say, take Clorox for coronavirus, we put up something that said, don't do that. But that is one way to cover him, but do it in a fair and truthful way.
I love that, Nicole. Hi, everyone. It's nice to meet you guys. I don't know if you've heard of me, but we're pretty new, and I did go to Cronkite, so I love being back here. One thing when I was thinking about this was fairness. Why did they have him? I actually don't know. They didn't have other candidates. When Anderson Cooper was asked about it later, he said, because he's the front runner and we can't ignore him. I don't think anyone was asking them to ignore him at that moment in May 2023 before the actual cycle had begun, but maybe they were asking not to platform one candidate who already has such a wide audience and give him more audience. Where were the other candidates in that? And so that was one thing that stuck out to me, and I love your approach. I think that would have made it a lot better. I think that the moderator did the best she could sitting up there. I watched it again today because I knew I would be speaking about it, and I remember thinking, like, she's doing a better job than I could do. She was saying that's not true every time he said something, but the problem was the platform.
And if I could just add on to that, one of the reasons they said they did it in a live stream was because they didn't want to get accused of editing unfairly. But I think if you contrast that with what Meet the Press did with just last Sunday, they actually did a sit-down, non-spectacle, edited interview, but then they posted posted the entire hour and a half online. So I thought that was really smart. You get around the critics who say you unfairly edited that, but you don't broadcast things that you know are going to be untrue.
I'm glad you brought that broadcast up, Nicole, of Meet the Press on Sunday for a couple of reasons. As you know, as I'm not sure all of us know, a lot of people were upset that NBC even entertained the notion of doing an interview with Donald Trump, recorded or otherwise. And so I think that's an interesting element of this. But you, Nicole, have some particular insight with regard to Meet the Press. And I was wondering if you could share what that is and some of what that insight is with regard to that telecast.
Sure. Well, I don't speak for NBC or Meet the Press, but my daughter is a producer on Meet the Press. So I was talking to her quite a bit about this. And the thing I was so impressed about was how much they prepared. I mean, Kristen Welker was preparing for, days and days and days before that. Same thing we did when we would put up those fact checks in the middle of a press conference. She was really had different people working with her to be ready to be, to correct the record or to say, yes, that's true. You want to make sure you're doing both. The other thing that they did, I thought was smart, was in addition to, again, the setting was very serious one-on-one chairs on a big shining stage that sort of ramps, people up, is that they broke it into segments. So she was fact checking in the moment, but then they would break and they'd come back to her at the anchor desk and she would fact check then as well. And then they'd go to another thing and she fact checks. I thought that was really smart. Whereas Caitlin Collins, right, on CNN was just, it was, just a fire cannon of an hour's worth of that. So I think the way they approached it was really smart. The preparation, how serious they took it. And they, had him on and they all have talked about this because we've had a presidential debate that he didn't participate in and that he is the front runner by a significant margin at this point. So maybe that wasn't, as true back in May, but I think right now he is clearly the Republican front runner and it was important for them to get him on the record. And they did make news. They made news when he said, that he decided himself to challenge the 2020 election. That could come back to haunt him in some of the legal challenges. So I think it showed that there was a value to it.
Well, I just want to note that as a broadcast producer, there's a lot you can do when there is no live audience, right? And when it's pre-taped. And I think you really can be as thorough as you want to be, as factual as you can be, and you have an advantage there. But when there's a live audience and you want, I'm sure there were many more eyeballs on that CNN town hall than there were on this Sunday broadcast. And part of that is because the town hall adds an energy, it adds a, seemingly spontaneousness, and that's, what television, at least in covering candidates for TV, really gets they get a vibe from that. And sometimes that's what we're about too.
No doubt that a lot of politicians feed off a live audience, some more than others. Before we get too far away from it, I wanted to come back to some things you mentioned, Elisa, in your first comment, and that is the concepts of fairness, truth. I don't know if you said it specifically, but objectivity and neutrality. Those are things that have been staples of journalism for a long time, and yet in this current era, there is some questioning of them. Exactly what they mean. Are they equivalent to one another? Are there some distinctions? Maybe as another way of leading into this, I would note that Margaret Sullivan, who until recently was a media critic with the Washington Post, said that in this era of political coverage, it is important for journalists to keep a sharp focus on truth-seeking, not old-style performative neutrality. We should not resort to taking everything down the middle, no matter what. That journalists should tamp down the instinct to be neutral. I'm also reminded of, speaking of CNN, of something that Christina Amanpour is credited with saying, and that is, be truthful, not neutral. So agree, if we agree, and maybe I should throw that out there too, if we agree that changes need to happen in the way that politics is being covered now, say compared to how it was 2015, 2016 to the present. Do we need to rethink some of these concepts, particularly the notion of being neutral, and to recognize that neutrality and objectivity are not the same thing? To everyone.
You wanna go, Jen?
I think of neutrality and the truth as the same thing. I think that you're being neutral by telling the truth and by challenging people on their lives. And I don't see that as having a bias. I think that obviously there's some people on both sides of the aisle that are going to lie, and you're going to call them out on that. And I don't see any difference when people say, you know, journalists aren't objective. Well, they're objective when they tell the truth. That's the only defense. So I don't really understand that debate so much, and that's what we do.
I think one of the things that's really difficult is we open ourselves up when we say we're going for truth and not necessarily fairness. If we're going to side on truth, and then therefore some people are going to get more coverage, or we're going to call out some others more often, then the press is attacked for that, for not being fair, right? There's always going to be a side that says, well, now we can't believe anything you say because you're not fair anymore. So we are changing sort of the dynamics of journalism. We are changing, I think, at least what we've been preaching for years and years, even if we didn't always maintain that, by saying we're going after truth, and we may not be as fair all the time. And that is not an easy pill to swallow. It's probably not something these guys believe in either. You know, I don't know that they believe in that objectivity is easily attained. I've heard that from a lot of new journalists. I'd be interested to hear what you think about that, Nicole.
Yeah, so I have a real world example of this. So we all know the election was on Tuesday, and we'd all reported that it was going to take time to get the results, that there was, you know, the out of state and out of country ballots and the mail-in ballots, and it was going to take time. But on Thursday, Trump, who was still in the White House, had a press conference from the White House, and we started to live stream it because, again, that was our, you know, if it's national significance, you know, it's not just a campaign thing, we'll give it a whirl. And so we started live streaming it, and as he was going through it, it just turned into the election was stolen, this big fraud, you know, Joe Biden, you know, wrong. And I took it down in the middle of the live stream. I pulled it down, and I tweeted to everyone, you know, we are all about fairness, but we're not going to do propaganda. And, you know, when the president from the White House, with the White House as a backdrop, is telling people the election was stolen when there was zero evidence of that being true, that was propaganda. So I had half the world thought it was great and half the world wanted to kill me. And, you know, what I kept saying is, you know, he can say whatever he wants. This isn't the First Amendment thing, but it's our responsibility as journalists to share the truth and to not be state-controlled media, right? State-controlled media is when you have to run everything the president says. So, you know, to me, that was like a real-life example of fairness. Are you going to let him speak from the White House? Plenty of other stations carried it. But as journalists, it's up to you to decide for your platforms what truth you're going to share. And it doesn't always have to be because we've always run every press conference from the White House.
So let's talk about another reality of journalism. It's a business. It's just it, right? Depends on ratings, circulation figures, clicks, advertising revenue. In 2016, the chairman of CBS acknowledged an imbalanced amount of coverage weighted in favor of Donald Trump by saying, it may not be good for America, but it's damn good for CBS. He further admitted that while the campaign was a circus, in his word, the money is rolling in, so that makes it okay. Damn, of course, torpedoes full speed ahead. So, and I was reminded of some of us will remember when the tobacco company executives testified before Congress in news organizations like 60 Minutes did stories on them, and basically they had the same sort of attitude that, yeah, our product is killing Americans, but we're making a lot of money. So is this part of the old way, so to speak, that needs to be called into question, particularly when it comes to the coverage of politics and campaigns, and when the fate of the nation, or on a smaller scale, states and communities, is at stake?
I mean, yes and no. So as somebody who's produced debates, I can tell you I've been in the control room when the debates are just kind of humming along and people are actually giving their opinions about, or actually stating their positions on things, and everybody in the control room is kind of like, and then somebody throws out a zinger and we all kind of sit up and go, oh, was this the moment? We want to get ready. This is the moment. I mean, we're charged for it. So I'd be lying if I said, as a TV person, I didn't sit up and notice when things got heated, and I think as humans, that's what we do, right? And because we're making money by the eyeballs that we get. Yep, it's that we are gonna have to sort of really dial back that desire to just megaphone those zingers out there for the sake of throwing them out there for eyeballs, for ratings. Is that gonna happen anytime soon? I don't know, but one thing that has changed a lot, I think, is because we've done this now, to our detriment. Our reporters are now targets. Some of those zingers are now directed at us, and that feels different. And now all of a sudden, maybe we are changing how we do things because we don't like to be the ones who are put in that position anymore. We're making the news because politicians are honing in on us, and I think that's making us stand up and say, maybe not exploit that so much. We have to find a better way to cover. I think that's absolutely the direction that we're moving in. I hope it is. Maybe watching more debates that are a little less zingerified. Is that a word?
I don't think it's going to change until the business model changes. It's just not. If you're to a board of directors or to the public, if you're a publicly traded company and you're expected to increase your profits every quarter, you're going to do things to increase your profits every quarter. And so I think maybe it's a whole different discussion about nonprofit versus for-profit journalism. But I don't think it's going to change until the model changes. It's just not.
I mean, this is an inherent problem that I see as a reporter every day when I'm trying to cover things that are boring, right? Like elections and voting. No one, it's hard to gain an audience for that. What's easy as like when during the new Republican debate, the latest Republican debate, when Vivek I'm so sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. When Vivek got up there and was making outlandish statements and everyone was writing about them right away and putting the headlines up, and the next day's coverage was all about that. It brought me back to 2015 with Trump, and so lessons have been learned from that. Because of the business model, and so that's not a very optimistic sentence.
Social media, I mean, those zingers, just that megaphone is so much bigger with social media. Those short little clips, they're so fun to watch over and over in memes or whatever. I mean, I hate to admit it, but I'm a sucker for that stuff too. So yeah, I suspect you're right.
Well, I think all of you can make a difference though, and when you get into your jobs, because one of the things we learned is the best practices were the old days, 2015, you would say, Trump says outlandish thing, and then that'd be the headline, and the outlandish thing is the first sentence, and the second sentence is, but other people disagree. Well, you can't do that, because on the phone, sometimes all you see is the headline, or sometimes all you see is the first sentence. So we really came down to, in the headline, you have to say, Trump claims he won the election, which isn't true, or Trump falsely claims to have won the election. In the headline, you can't wait. You can't do the 1, 2 lead. It's got to be, once again, Trump falsely claimed to win the election, despite overwhelming evidence. Like you can't breathe. You can't do it the way it used to be done. So I think when we do report on these debates and these zingers, all of you, can insist on doing it in a responsible way.
I'm glad, Jen, that you brought up Mr. Ramaswamy, because he helps us understand and remember that Mr. Trump doesn't occupy a particular niche by himself. There are others that join him in that particular approach. In examining the issue of covering a campaign in which politicians like that are participants, some people have raised the notion that the messages of those politicians will in fact contain provably false statements, intolerance, racial bias, anti-democratic ideas, maybe even endorse violence, at least tacitly. So how do the news media report on that without being complicit in spreading information and amplifying that misinformation? Are journalists aiding and abetting the spread of misinformation when they allow people to say things like that or to quote their misinformation? Jen, you're our misinformation expert, so I'll turn to you first with that question.
That's a great one. We talk about story choice all the time. Are we going to cover this, or is it going to amplify a lie? And that's part of my daily job in deciding what stories I write. And sometimes we talk about what audience the lie has already reached, and therefore we need to correct it at all. And that's like the first decision we make. If it is already out there, how can we, like Nicole said, in the headline, in the top part of the story that people are probably going to get to maybe, how can we just kind of transform the lie into the truth without repeating it? And it's the same thing when you write a correction, when you get something wrong in a story, when you're not repeating the lie, you're not saying that 5 people did this, you're just saying 10 people did this and we got it wrong last time. So I think it's really about the word choice. Once you make the decision, you need to write the story.
I'm just gonna, just 100% agree with what you choose. There's just some small things you can do too. I keep looking at all of you because you're going to be doing this soon. You're very soon, and we already be doing it. But deciding to the newsroom what your style and your guidelines are going to be before you go into it. So, for example, we would never call it the China virus, even though Trump did. It was the coronavirus, and we said as a newsroom, unless it's a very, very, very necessary quote, we're going to call it the coronavirus. We're not going to repeat this sort of to your point. So I think we had pages and pages of examples of that. So I think, before an election, before it gets heated up, really talking to your newsroom about, do we have a style guide? Do we have, how we're going to handle when people say this, so that you're not stuck in the moment. You're forewarned and you're more prepared.
And I would say too that we depend on you to help guide us in a lot of this too. I mean, in many ways, you know more than we do even about some coded language or things of that sort. And so I'm more than one occasion have had students point out to me phrasing or terminology that I had no idea should have been flagged. So some of the best information comes from all of you. I think you guys know a lot more than we do sometimes, and we appreciate it.
Just to follow up on this, Jen, on this information issue, and to show how it permeates all levels of society, all levels of government. You reported less than a month ago on Maricopa County supervisor and the trial of his harasser. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think this is not my voice. So basically, this is how the misinformation turns into real-life consequences, where we have our local officials who are Republicans being accused of switching votes and changing the results of the election, which then results in real-life consequences for them and their family. Sitting in that courtroom was a really emotional time for me and everyone in that courtroom, because we've all kind of been through it together. We've seen how the consequences, the threats and the harassment, and that really shows the importance of just being thoughtful about news judgment and not going with the best headline that's gonna make the most clicks, but really focusing on trying to spread the truth and also gain an audience for that truth while you do it.
It also really hit home for us in the last election cycle when Arizona PBS became part of the conversation when it came to a certain Senate debate, government debate, excuse me. And our students were targeted. And I have many students who said, you know, I'm not going to go out and cover this event on election night. They did not want to go to specific places because they didn't feel safe or they didn't feel like they had the ability to counter any potential pushback. So, I mean, you're going to feel it. You'll feel it tomorrow too. You know, it's not just to the officials who are potentially targeted. I think it can happen to any of us at any time, and that fear is real, I think.
Well, and it seems to me that in part at least we're touching on accountability. You know, one of the primary reasons why we have free press is so that the press can hold those in power accountable. And maybe just to dive a little bit into another story of yours, Jen, one that you shared with me very recently, the weaponization, if I may, I don't know if you use that word, but I will, the weaponization of records requests and how that is being used in this illicit sort of manner, I think it's safe to say.
So I wrote a story about how public records requests, which are obviously a great open government tool for transparency, are almost being, like you said, weaponized or used against public officials, and the fact that they're being used to get real facts and then they turn into really strong lies. So the stronger, if you use a fact and turn it into a lie, it's a lot stronger and it goes a lot more places. And that's kind of what's happening here locally and across the country as people just barrage election officials with records requests to try to gain information that then they can twist and you know, it's first harassment and does all sorts of things.
We, I think more than once already here have talked about lying, politicians who lie. A recent New York Times article described, for example, 5 ways that Donald Trump consistently lies about the 2020 election. Certainly lying in politics happened before Donald Trump. But I would also add that in a recent interview, Anderson Cooper of CNN said this: there was a steep learning curve in figuring out how to deal with a candidate, speaking of Mr. Trump, who is completely willing to lie and lies repeatedly and often. Another commentator said there's a shamelessness in that, and only so much that you can do to keep reporting about it from that standpoint. I remember when the 2016 campaign was underway, probably going back to 2015, and journalists were extremely reluctant to use the word lie. So I guess in part what I'm asking here is some of the burden on the world of journalism in how it approaches this topic, how it acknowledges or chooses not to acknowledge that lying is in some cases rampant.
Well, and I think we also have to do some real soul searching as a profession because politicians have been lying, as you mentioned, forever. Were we calling out all of Kennedy's lies? How about Nixon's lies? How about Clinton's lies? We've been part of it for so long, and there is some fair criticism to be leveled at us, I think, where we were willing to kind of wink and nod and let some things pass by when it came to certain subject matters, right? They lied about their personal lives. Nixon had some other big whoppers in there, and eventually he did get called out. We had to. So when it came down to actually then approaching somebody who was consistently telling big fat whoppers, we had to say, well, we haven't called out others. Are we going to do this? It was very uncomfortable for us for a lot of us. And now I think it's routine, isn't it?
Sorry, that's okay. No, you can share. Okay, I agree too. I think there was a real reckoning of journalists on precise language in all kinds of ways. Certainly the lying, you know, back then we were like, well, did they willfully lie or did they just not know the truth? And so I think we understand now they're lying and we say they're lying. I think the other thing is true for, you know, used a term offensive to people of color. It's like, no, they used a racist term or, you know, I mean, I think the other thing is, you know, officer involved shooting. No. An cop shot somebody. So I think across the spectrum, we're getting better, thankfully, at being more direct and honest in our language.
I don't use lie in my stories a lot. I just don't. You can't prove intent. You have to know that person knew that they were telling the lie, that they would lie, or else it's just a false claim. And so I'm a little bit different on that. You know, most of my stories will say, presented without evidence, or a claim that has not been proven, or something like that. Because once you call someone a liar, you automatically isolate an audience that doesn't believe that and doesn't believe you, doesn't believe that they think that they're a liar. And you don't want to isolate audience. You need all the audience you can get.
And I do think you've got to be careful and judicious, 100%. But I think when it, like, so here's another example. Like, remember the protest of the summer? I was down there on Lafayette Square when the Secret Service, the military in front of the White House, put out some kind of gas into the crowd, and our eyes were burning. And they came back and said, "No, we didn't." And we said, "Yeah, you did. Our eyes are burning." And so they lied about that. Like, they knew they did it, and they were lying. But I do think you got to be careful because you can lose your credibility. But if it's beyond the shadow of a doubt, if my eyes are burning, or if my colleagues' eyes are burning, there was tear gas or innocent that day.
Beyond the issue of lying, just more generally speaking, do the challenges that journalism faces in covering campaigns and politics generally include a closer look inward? More transparency? Is that going to help the process? Is that going to benefit the citizenry if they have a better understanding, potentially at least, of the journalistic process?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we have better journalism now. We have better coverage of politics now than we ever had. If you look back 20 or 30 years, if somebody calls that the heyday, I mean, you know, we were, it's the ivory tower, right? I mean, we missed entire swaths of population and how they felt about things because we covered it from one perspective. So, yes, I think all those tough questions that we asked ourselves are really helping us tell better stories. And I think having those discussions every day about the stories that we cover are allowing us to tell better stories. And, you know, it's not always easy to be honest with yourself about your own bias, but those are helping us to be better journalists. And I think we're being forced to do that more and more often now, which is a good thing.
I wish I could ask all of your questions. I think the moving thing out there, tell me if you think, is that the younger generation of journalists thinks that they should be able to express opinions on social media in the interest of transparency. How many of you guys think you should be able to express your opinion? So I think it's a really, really good discussion for us to have. I'm old school, you know. I always say, you to your point, you'll lose half your audience if you come out and say I'm in favor of this or I think this is right or wrong. So I always held a big line on that, but that's changing, and I'm really curious where this is going. So I want to talk to all of you about that.
So if I gave my opinion on Twitter right now, X, whatever it's called now, I would be absolutely slaughtered. And I don't think it's productive. Why does it matter, actually? If you can recognize your internal biases and then report truthfully and honestly, that's my core. And so that's what you need to stick to. It's not relevant in my eyes where I came from or what I believe. If I can, I'm breaking your down.
Yeah. Although I do think we should, having those discussions in our newsroom, that's very helpful.
I do want to mention that we're going to be happy to take questions from you folks. However, because this is, event is being live streamed, we need to have your questions, set into a microphone. So if you do have a question, please come down to this stand where a microphone will actually be placed. And,
Yeah.
all right.
So one of the things that I was wondering is if we don't give Trump that opportunity, we alienate half the country. So how do we reach into that echo chamber and like actually give them the facts?
Okay, and what was the first part of the question?
So if we don't give Trump the opportunity to like spread that misinformation when half the country wholeheartedly believes that, and we don't even acknowledge that, how do we give the space the facts?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I actually, Meet the Press has taken a lot of heat for even having him on, and I disagree with that. I think you needed to have him on for that exact reason, and I think you need to be responsible because that's how you get you need to hear what he's saying so you can refute it or you can correct it or you can analyze it. And if you never let him speak, to your point, you'll never do that. I think the answer to speech you disagree with is more speech, and so I think it's incredibly important that they did that in such a responsible way. Great question.
Thank you.
And I also want to say, I also think it's really important that we understand what he's tapping into, where he's coming from. He's making some valid points about things, not, whether they're truthful or not. So letting him, understanding that, I think is hugely important.
I'm really glad you asked that. I don't know where you went, but I don't think media organizations think enough about reaching out to all audiences. And so you have to understand when you're trying to correct someone, why is that important and who are you talking to? And so that's what I mean by using isolating language. We don't say election deniers at VoteBeat because that is, we believe that's the language that doesn't really explain what someone believes. Do they believe the 2020 election was stolen? Then just say that. So I think that there's like choices about the stories you write and the language you use that can really open up your audience.
Hi, I wanted to ask about, we've been talking a lot about presidential elections, but obviously in Arizona, we're about to have probably one of the most unprecedented Senate elections in a very long time. We have a possible three-way race with one candidate, especially who is possibly even more hostile to the media than Donald Trump was. So I guess my question is, how do we cover a campaign that's going to require more involvement with three possible candidates, and especially one that is openly hostile to us journalists?
I've been thinking about this a lot because I will be directing all of you to be covering this in just a few weeks, actually, or a few months. One of the biggest issues is do we cover the events? Do we cover the zingers if we can't also if there's no meaningful conversation? So if these candidates won't do debates or won't do one-on-ones, do we still then just show up at their events and advertise what they want us to say? In some cases, yes, if that's the only access we have, we can't ignore some of the main candidates. But I think one of the other things we need to do is we need to get into the weeds of sort of policy and process. And that sounds awful, but I think all of you and journalists who are writing through Substacks and are doing it in a language that makes so much sense and connects to so many more people. We can cover the process. We can cover the policy of candidates. We can cover that stuff in a way I think that's still very intriguing and very interesting and isn't just about the attacks. And we have to do it. It takes time, but honestly, I think a lot of you are more comfortable with that kind of writing and that kind of reporting than some of us are. And I love it. I love reading it. I love digesting it. And you're getting that wonky stuff that is really important for making informed decisions, but it's in a way that's really digestible. So I'm going to keep digesting that and encouraging all of you to do it too.
I can completely agree with you. You got to get away from the horse race and talking about issues and where they stand and what it means. And not to keep going back to the Trump interview, but I thought I heard the best answer he's ever given about a national abortion ban and where he feels about, how many weeks and this and that. And he thinks that there's a time to maybe the country to come together. So I'm like, that's a great story to go after, is that. Like, don't worry about his zinger. Go after is there room for a national abortion ban if the circumstances are right? And so there's so many issues to cover beyond the rallies. You don't need to be there.
I don't have much to add other than you don't let the candidates set the talking points. I mean, there's nothing to be gained from partisan talking points. They divide us more. And so you ask the questions that you think that you let the community dictate the questions you ask.
Thank you very much.
Links to the previous question there, I mean, at least somewhat. We talked earlier about a reality of journalism, but maybe another reality in part related to journalism. We used to think, and maybe we still hold on to this hope, that if we can just get the word out about various topics, then it'll all be okay because people will learn, they will absorb the information, and we can go merrily along our way. I think we know now that that's not necessarily true. I mean, Nicole, for example, you mentioned, taking down the live feed of Mr. Trump, and you speculated that half of America hated you for that. So no matter how truthful or how accurate the information is, we now are pretty confident that some people will consistently reject some of that information. We are polarized, we are tribalized. I'll just throw this out for the moment. How do we handle that? And to what extent do we need to be concerned about that as we approach our stories and our reporting?
I think part of the problem, but also a great thing, is that candidates themselves have their own platform to tell their own story. And so you let them tell their story through their platform, and you take advantage of the fact that you're an established news organization, that if you tell the credible truth, people are going to come to you. But you don't try to replace the following that they've built on their own audiences.
I'm just going to go back even further downstream on that. I think in general, there's a big distrust of the media right now. It's more pronounced nationally than locally. And I think locally, we need to do a better job of engaging with our audiences and regaining that trust. And then they'll believe you when this happens. But I think there's no silver bullet. You got to go back to the beginning and figure out how to regain that relationship. We know what's happening with local news right now with so much of the cutbacks and the big chains and news deserts, or not covering things that the community cares about. And we've got to fix that. We've got to fix it fundamentally, the relationship between press and the people, and it starts at the local level. So that's not a quick fix for what ails us, but it's really important that we do that.
Yeah, I think there is a legitimate point that some people have made that there hasn't been enough care to understand what that segment of, what either segment or any segment of the population is concerned about and why. I wanted to also bring up democracy. A frequent topic in the vast literature on this subject is democracy. Just a couple of examples. One writer said that this past summer was one in which American democracy has been walking a tightrope over the authoritarian chasm. Another writer, Donald Trump does not respect democracy, the democracy he once led, and he wishes to lead it again. Is democracy truly being threatened? And if so, again, since this is why we're here, what can journalism do about it?
As just a tiny issue. I mean, this is going to sound like a little bit of a cop out, but when I look out here, I think we're okay. We're okay. I mean, the it feels scary in the moment. I hear certain things that are, machinations are going on, and oh my goodness, our government could have been overthrown at that point. Oh my goodness, there were fake electors. Oh my goodness. And then you think, how is that happening in the United States? And it was happening, and it did happen. And you think democracy is on the line. And then I see there is like this, there are dozens of people, future journalists, hopefully, future communicators, and all of you are interested in this idea of communicating with people, maybe not about politics, but about what's happening in your world. And I think we're okay. And that might sound Pollyannish, but I have faith, having worked with so many students, I have faith in all of you and the fact that you know what your responsibility is. And I don't think we're gonna, I'm not one who believes that 30 years ago were the glory days. I really don't. I think there's some scary stuff going on, but there's also some real eye-opening great stuff going on that we should be and maybe this is part of where we need to be right now, to open us up to other aspects of democracy.
I agree that, you guys give us all hope, but I don't think we can ever take democracy for granted. And the democratic institutions of this country are under fire and under pressure. And the only way to maintain a democracy is to maintain those institutions. And look at what's happening with the Supreme Court and the polarization there. Look what's happening in Congress when, every internal radio coming in about, more fake electors who were trying to subvert the congressional process. I think about what's happening with journalism. It is a democratic institution. And I look at what's happening with journalism. So I do think it will find a way, and I trust all of you to help it, but you cannot take it for granted, and you have to fight for it.
Not to advertise for vote beat, but
However,
no, I don't know if you guys have any idea what the statement democracy at risk means, but there's been democracy beats launched across the country in various newsrooms, news organizations for reporters to cover this topic of democracy and if it's a threat. And I think that's really very important because it actually breaks down what it means to have a democracy that is being challenged or fake electors. What does that actually mean? What are the safeguards in place? And down the line, if Donald Trump is elected again, what would he actually do to change democracy? Like just the details of it that are kind of boring, but don't you kind of want to know that that's what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the general statements.
among the, I will call it a democratic institution, among the democratic institutions that have been under siege is the fourth estate, the news media. Mr. Trump and his followers have called the news media the enemy of the people. The credibility of the news media has deteriorated, at least in the eyes of some, in some circles. Some would say that the news media have become, in fact, less relevant since that happened. Any thoughts in terms of how to successfully push back on that?
I mean, I would say. Hands up. Okay, 5 minutes.
My coffee's.
Yeah, I would. It is changing. It's changing for us. It's changing for all of you. Again, I think it's changing in a lot of ways that are fantastic. But it is the thing that makes me the most sort of nervous for our journalists is how much we've been made a target. And I'm not, I don't know the answer to that yet because we still need to push back, right? We still need to do all those things that journalists are supposed to do. We are the fourth estate. We have to be the watchdogs. And so that makes us a target. Automatically, it makes us a target. It's just that being a target today feels a lot different probably than it did a few years ago, just 4 years ago, really. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that building trust in all the ways you can, making sure you're talking to everyone. When I was a Republican, we endorsed Hillary Clinton for president. It was the first time a Republican endorsed Democrat in 125 years, and the death threats flowed in. One guy said, we're gonna show up at our doorsteps and throw acid on us. I'm like, how are you gonna do that? Anyway, but I went to the Trump rally that week in Crescent Valley, and I stood at the front of the president, and I had my badge out, and I was trying to engage everybody who walked by, like, you know, talk about this. And everybody kept saying, it's not gonna do any good. You gotta try, right? You gotta try. So I just think we have to be right, you have to be factual, you have to be accurate, you can't be loaded language, you have to be respectful, you have to tell the truth. And I do think they will prevail. I do think, you know, I talked to a lot of politicians who said, wow, you guys were so hard on me during my term in office and I respected you for it because you were right. And they're not gonna say that in time, but when they're done, they absolutely tell you that. And then they'll start calling you all kinds of scoops because they realize that they're trustworthy.
That is so true. That is so true. As a major target myself at points, I really feel this question because I'm looking out at you guys and I'm like, I hope this isn't the case for you. I have hope. I feel like I've been reached out to by a few people just in the last week wanting to like meet for coffee and things like that. And so hopefully the environment's changing. But I think newsrooms need to make decisions about where reporters go. You know, don't go alone on assignments that you're worried about, that kind of decision making that gives you power to still do your job, but also be safe.
And make connections, right? It's the human connections that we make with anybody on the campaign. It's the candidate, it's the candidate's wife, it's their whatever. Those connections make you human. As a journalist, the candidates will treat you differently if you are a human in some way in their eye. And I think those will help you with better coverage. And I think it'll, you know, it'll help the process overall. Make those connections. We're reporters. We do that every day.
I feel like these last few comments are hopeful, and that is a good note maybe to therefore close on. Again, I want to thank Lisa Adams and Bill Carroll and Fifield for sharing their expertise with us, with you in particular. So please thank them for being here.